Now, earlier on, we spoke with the Turkey Deputy Prime Minister, Mehmet Simsek, on President Erdogan's surprise call for early elections and why he thinks it's good for the Turkish economy and for investors.
It's actually good news. Market reactions show that. The reason is that essentially saves investors from getting worried for 18 months. Normally, elections were scheduled for November 2019. So that brings it forward. And that eases essentially uncertainty, reduces it. Plus, snap elections means you don't have a prolonged campaign period. Only 2 months. Election economics is highly likely to be very limited. Noise, usually associated with elections, likely be subside. So in that sense, I think it's good news for investors. It will provide clarity, get a fresh mandate, and hopefully start with reforms.
What is the question you got the most here at the IMF? Is it on the snap elections or is it on the falling lira?
Well, yesterday I had meetings with investors. A number of U.S. investment banks hosted a number of events, so I was able to interact with almost 100 investors. I think the key question in their mind is what sort of policy framework post-election? Will Turkey move to a more of an orthodox monetary policy? Will Turkey jumpstart second, third generation reforms to avoid the middle income trap? Things like that. Those were the key questions. There was less about the outcome of the elections. It seems like everybody seemed to be banking on a new term.
You had a storied career at Merrill Lynch, and then you've had your public service to your nation of Turkey. And part of that has been a constant depreciation of the Turkish lira for any set of reasons. There hasn't been a lot of central bank action on the lira yet. Are we at a tipping point where if there's further lira erosion, depreciation, devaluation, that you and Mr. Erdogan have to act?
Well, for 10 years, lira appreciated in nominal terms. Last few years, which has been traumatic for Turkey because of geopolitics and all other, domestic and external shocks, lira has been weak. Some support for lira would help. I can't make a call on monetary policy because central bank is independent. However, having said that, clearly some support would help.
Within that, and within the idea that some support would help, is do you do it yourself, or do you need institutional allies to help Turkey to stabilize the lira or even strengthen it? Can you go it alone?
Well, it's going to be a combination of factors. First of all, I think elections and post-election, reviving reform program, moving to a more simplified monetary policy framework. I think that would provide a strong message. The worst is likely behind Turkey in the sense that, tourism is recovering very strongly. Economy has done very well last year. Momentum is still reasonably strong. It's moderating. We should ease pressure both on inflation and on current account deficit. So fundamentally, we still have a strong fiscal position. We have low debt to GDP, and the banking sector is still in reasonably good health. The two rough spots in Turkish economy, current account deficit and inflation, I think with some moderation in credit growth and some reform effort, we could kind of like regain market confidence and put behind these difficult episodes.
And I want to get on Turkish credit in a second, but when you look at the devaluation of the lira, 10% in March, why has the central bank not acted?
Well, central bank has recently indicated that they will act. I think it is important that we bring inflation back on a lasting basis to a single digit. Now, this is very critical. The only way Turkey was able to deliver very strong growth, and by the way, it's like 5.8% for 15 years, it was on the back of disinflation, sound macroeconomic policies, structural reforms. Now we cannot afford to let that slip.
But is the central bank truly independent in Turkey?
Well, legally, there is nothing holding them back. They get appointed for 5 years. They cannot be removed. Their only mandate is price stability, and in that sense is independent. But there has been, strong debate about where the monetary policy stance should be. Now, whether or not that has been effective, obviously that's open to question.
But the central bank meets on Wednesday. Do you think on Wednesday they will take decisions independently of political influence?
Again, central bank is independent and they can act independently. So it all boils down to the Monetary Policy Committee. I'm saying this, legally it is so, and practically it is so. There has been occasions, there has been cases where central bank did respond despite an intense debate where monetary policy should be.
Minister, I want to ask you about the sprawl of the Levant in the Middle East and of Turkey that we see right now. Your remit is financial. Your claim is what you did for the Turkish economy. I think of Robert Kaplan's book, The Return of Marco Polo, that's just out, that's talking of a new Eurasia. How does your Turkey, and with the domestic tumult of Turkey, how does it fit into the region in 3 years or 5 years?
Well, first of all, Turkey right now is the world's largest refugee hosting country. We host a combined Iraqi, Syrians, about 4 million.
Are you getting enough support from the West on that? You've had the courage to take
appreciate European
thousands.
support, even though it's been very slow and limited. Turkey has spent close to $34 billion over the past 6-7 years on refugees. We can afford it, and we're doing it simply because we feel that we have to do it. Because they have no choice. They're running for their lives. So my point is, Turkey is looking forward to a somewhat more stable, more democratic, more peaceful region. Why? And we want to help reconstruction. We want to help. I'm not talking about business here, purely helping. But we need to have a lull in violence. The good news is the barbaric ISIS has been dismantled. That's very important, very important. It's time now to stabilize Syria. Iraq has gone a long way in terms of stabilization, even though it's not fully there. Then we can talk about reconstruction.
You were an exceptionally important voice, your childhood in southeastern Turkey, with all the different tensions within Turkey. Do you see out of the present chaos, the political, the domestic damage that's been done, do you see a new Turkey where there can be a more domestic peace from the west of Turkey to the east?
Well, the current Turkey, unfortunately, is a product of a number of traumas that we have experienced. It is very unusual to have a cultish religious network try to grab the power. It's an alien concept. I mean, it's very hard for our friends and allies to understand, but it's largely behind us. At some point, Turkey was subject to intense terror attacks. 30 major terrorist attacks between mid-2015 and of 2016. And that was because we have 911 kilometers of border with Syria. And Syria is no longer a functioning state. Turkey now has a good grasp. We build a wall, we're there, so it's under control. So what I'm trying to say is that most likely the worst is behind us. Rebuilding new Turkey will require going back to strengthening rule of law, enhancing standards of democracy, continue to boost fundamental rights and freedoms for everybody. Now, I don't believe that there is less of a commitment to this. What is happening right now, the threat level, the perceived threat and the real threat is there, and that's why Turkey is responding the way it has responded.
Deputy Prime Minister, I want to go back to the economy and back to the Lira. Is there anywhere to support the Lira that the central bank could do without raising interest rates?
Well, I think we're beyond talking, clearly at some point we have to convince the markets that we are able to bring inflation down, that we are able to contain current account deficit. The world around us is changing. I mean, right now global growth is there and maybe sustained for a little, for a couple of years.
Yeah.
But this is the time when we address underlying vulnerabilities.
Right.
Now, the bright spots are we have a strong fiscal position, we have a healthy banking system. The real economy is doing well, but the rough spots needs attention.
Does that mean that something on Wednesday would be a strong message to the investor community? Is that what you're trying to tell me?
I know what you're trying to get me to say, but it wouldn't be appropriate for me to really comment on what central bank will or will not do on Wednesday.